Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Kind of a strange case out of the Supreme Court that Neil sent me. And the headline really makes you wonder, but the explanation makes sense. However, a lot of people will still disagree with it. So it has to do with how you interpret a statute and the words in a statute. So I got this version from the New York Times, but it was widely reported. I read about 5 or 10 different stories on this case, and I decided to go with this one because I think this is the best explanation. Adam Liptak wrote it. The Supreme Court says 10 burglaries can count as one offense. 10 burglaries can count as one offense. The case involves a federal law that enhances sentences for certain types of crimes when the defendant had committed 3 felonies on occasions different from one another. So on different occasions. So what is an occasion versus simply an offense? We'll get there. In 1997, a man pleaded guilty to 10 counts of burglary because he'd broken into one of those storage unit places and broken into 10 different units, okay? And it all happened on one night. More than a decade later, he was convicted of being a felon in possession of a gun. Prosecutors sought a stiffer sentence under the Armed Career Criminal Act, which is sort of a 3 strikes statute. It's a federal statute. And it calls for a mandatory 15-year minimum sentence for defendants who unlawfully possessed a gun and had been convicted of 3 or more felonies like burglary committed on different occasions. That is, committed on occasions different from one another. So the statute uses the phrase committed on occasions different from one another, as opposed to simply convictions. So a trial judge ruled that each burglary, which he did 10 that one night, was a separate occasion. So it's 10 burglaries, 10 separate occasions, and sentenced the man to 16 years on the gun charge, about 14 years longer than the recommended sentence had he not been subject to that enhancement. Okay? So recently, the Supreme Court ruled that the series of burglaries took place on a single occasion, sparing him from the longer sentence and giving rise to an extended and colorful meditation on the meaning of the word occasion. So Kagan, writing for 8 members of the court, consider how an ordinary person might describe the 10 burglaries and how they would not. They would say, on one occasion, he burglarized 10 units in a storage facility. By contrast, they would never say, on 10 occasions, he burglarized a unit in that facility. Nor would they say something like, on one occasion, he burglarized a storage unit. On a second occasion, he burglarized another. On a third occasion, and so on, all on the same night. Most people would say, well, that's all one occasion. And then she used an analogy. A wedding, for example, would include a ceremony, possibly cocktail hour, dinner, dancing. Those doings are proximate in time and place and have a shared theme. Their connections are indeed what makes them part of a single event, but they do not occur at the same moment. The newlyweds would surely take offense if a guest organized a conga line in the middle of their vows. So you'd think that that wedding would be a single occasion. The same is true when it comes to crime. In general, courts should consider a range of circumstances in deciding whether crimes took place on a single occasion. Among them are whether the offenses were close in time, part of an uninterrupted course of conduct, or in the same place. All of those factors counted in favor of this particular defendant, she wrote. Every member of the court sided with the defendant in this case, but Gorsuch did not adopt the reasoning that Kagan laid out that the others agreed with. He said that this multi-factor balancing test does not really give the lower courts much guidance. He wrote, imagine a defendant who sells drugs to the same undercover police officer twice at the same street corner an hour apart. Do the sales take place on the same occasion or different occasions? He added that since Kagan's factors did not conclusively answer the question presented in the case, that to him is a problem. When it comes to location, each storage unit had its own number and space. Each burglary infringed on a different person's property. and the defendant had to break through a new wall to enter each one. Suppose this case involved not adjacent storage units, but adjacent townhomes or adjacent stores in a mall. If he had torn through the walls separating them, would we really say his crimes occurred at the same location? No, but we might say they were all on the same occasion. Instead, he said it'd be better to apply one of the rules of statutory construction where ambiguous laws are construed to favor the defendant. And he says in that case, this guy would still get off in terms of what the other justices said. So they actually had an opinion which had several parts, and 8 of them concurred on one part, a bunch of them concurred on the other part, and it looks like all 9 of them basically agreed that the guy should get the lighter sentence, but they simply reached it by different ways. And so you might be saying, but Steve, really, is this the kind of thing that was probably intended by that statute? And here's the thing, this often happens, where the legislature writes a statute, and they get it passed the way you get a bill passed. So this legislature spent time crafting this language. And during that process, somebody probably asked about the wording and said, when you talk about a crime occurring on the same occasion, is that what we really mean? And it survived, and it got through the process and became the law. So it survived those processes. So right now, if there are legislators who worked on this bill or who are familiar with this statute, and they don't like this outcome, it's very, very easy for them to change the law. They can amend the law, and instead of saying that if it's committed on different occasions, they could simply say if he committed different felonies, because there's no question that the man pled guilty to committing 10 felonies on the same day or night and on the same occasion. And so, yeah, it is an odd thing. I'm not sure I've seen statutes that say that, the word occasion, with respect to committing a crime. And so you do wonder why they used that word. Now, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you interpret statutes. And if there are words in a statute that have specific meaning, the legislature can define the words as part of the statute. So, for instance, one of the big arguments that people have is they talk about what a motor vehicle is. And people say, well, what's a motor vehicle? Let's look it up in Black's Law Dictionary. Well, no, most statutes that address motor vehicles define motor vehicle. So if you go to the Michigan Motor Vehicle Code, which is in MCL 257, you'll find that there's a definition that says, under this code, a motor vehicle is this, and it defines it. So when a court has to interpret a statute involving a motor vehicle, they don't go to a dictionary, they go to the statute. If the drafters of the statute had wanted to, they could have defined what the occasion was. They could have said, here's what we mean by an occasion. But obviously, I think a cleaner fix for this would be, if they want to fix it, would be to remove the word occasion and say felony. So if they committed different felonies and they committed a certain number of felonies, then they're subject to this enhancement. That's assuming that that's what they meant. We don't know. And so a lot of times people will say, well, let's look at what the legislature intended to do with their statute. And the intent is something the courts are trying to look at and trying to get out of the statute. But the first thing they do is they look at the language, the plain language. And if the language is plain, you basically stop there. And so it would seem that they knew they could have used the word felony. They could have used the word crime, made it broader. But instead they said, felonies committed on occasions different from one another. Basically felonies on different occasions. And the question is, what's an occasion? And as I was thinking about this, I can see where there becomes this weird gray area. Because if somebody does break into a bunch of storage units at the same time and it's a string of crimes being committed at the same time, that little crime spree would seem to me to be one occasion. But if that's not what the legislature intended, they can fix it very easily. So when I first read the headline, I thought, okay, they're wrong on this. Read all the articles and I realized, no, I think they're actually right. And if the legislature doesn't like that result, or the people don't like that result, then they can amend the statute and remove occasions and put in felonies. They've committed a series of felonies, And if they've committed a bunch of different felonies, they add them up and you get the enhancement. So, Neil, thanks for sending it from the New York Times. Adam Liptak wrote it. Supreme Court says 10 burglaries can count as one offense, but that's only under this one particular statute with the enhancement. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Only those who risk going too far can possibly find out how far they can go.